Hi people, it's Archivist here, and today we're going to be talking about Star Wars Battlefront 2 and what we want to happen going forward. It's been over 2 months now since the game first came out. I'm sure everyone still remembers the whole controversy about loot boxes, how everything was going to be pay to win, but under immense pressure they had to remove that system at the last minute, but it continues to be at the back of people's mind because it will return in some form. Now, one of the big promises that was made by DICE was that all future DLC, like new maps and heroes, would come out absolutely free of charge, which is fantastic, not just because, well, it's free of charge, but also because you don't end up with that community divide that you ended up with in Battlefront 1, where you had some people who might have bought the entire season pass and could play on all of the DLC maps, but then you had some people who just didn't want to pay that money and ended up just stuck on the first maps, and therefore the overall number of people playing was diminished artificially because certain people couldn't play with other people because they hadn't purchased the DLC content. That's frustrating enough in terms of just finding a match quickly, but I think even more so when you're playing with friends and they don't want to buy the extra DLC, but you have done, it can lead to some situations where people feel pressured into buying extra content that they don't even want, they just want to continue playing with their friends. I know I've been in that situation before where I've had some of the new content, I've been playing it and I say, do you want to play with me? They come onto Battlefront 1 and then they couldn't play with me because they didn't have the content. So the idea of giving it out for free was fantastic. However, what we should have known, to be honest, was that there would have to be a way of paying for it. And that was, of course, this microtransaction system where you would pay for loot boxes. That was going to be the way that they funded it. That is now gone. So how are they going to fund it? There are a few different ways that this could go, and one I'll just start with right now is the biggest negative, and that is they just simply don't go through with their promise. They pull all support for the game and they say we just can't fund it, or we have no incentive to fund it, you aren't getting any DLC, or because they've made the promise they do give us DLC but with no real incentive to keep the game popular, they absolutely half-arse it, right? We get content but it's really low quality in comparison to the base game because they're just doing something out of an obligation now. There's no real reason for them to make it. And that would really stand out in a game like Battlefront 2 because most of the maps are so well detailed and sprawling in Galactic Assault case that it would really stand out like a sore thumb if future maps were just, really just phoned in because they were doing it, as I say, out of obligation. So I think it's in the interest of the players for us to identify the most acceptable means of them funding this. They could, for example, go back to a conventional system, although it does mean dividing the player base, just paying for DLC as and when it comes out. You end up with the disadvantages that I already mentioned, so it's not ideal, but at least it's something people are familiar with, and it's difficult to say there's anything ethically wrong with that, because they make new content, we pay for it, makes sense. There's nothing morally wrong with it in the same way there was with the initial plan. But then there is, in my opinion at least, the ideal situation that we end up in, and that is that skins that we know already exist in the game because modders are able to attach to them are given out via a store in-game. So it just means that if you want to buy, for example, a different skin for your battle droid or a different skin for a clone, you use real money for that. Never use real money for a star card that gives you an actual bonus in game, but just a cosmetic difference. We've seen this approach done before in games like Overwatch where you can buy loot crates and the loot crates can contain a new skin for a character. Although that does point out the fact that you are therefore able to attain the skin without using real money, it's just harder to get. And I think that's something that might help to soften the blow a bit if they introduce these skins, and while you can use real money to get them quickly, you can also grind them out if you want to. I would certainly like that. Although that has the potential to annoy people who don't want to have to grind for something. But personally, I think, again, we know we have to compromise in some way if we want the free DLC, and we want that DLC to be of high quality. And so I think that really is, in my humble opinion, the absolute best road they could go down is they introduce skins into the game, which again, we know exist because they're in the game files, and you can pay for them if you want to get them quickly, or as an alternative, you can grind maybe for a very, very long time credits out to get them. Also, just to be insanely controversial, let me make this suggestion for how they continue to support the game. What if it went to a subscription-based service? Now that immediately sounds awful. It would probably lose at least half, if not more, of the current player base if they did that. But there is a reason I make such a suggestion, even if it is quite outrageous. I've been playing World of Warcraft recently, and I just took a step back for a moment and realised, wait a second, I'm playing a game that came out well over a decade, and it's still got loads of people playing it. Why is this? Well, quite simply, it's because the game has continued to get lots of massive updates. You've got the big expansions, yes, but also after the expansion comes out, you get these huge content updates with loads of new quests, loads of new armor and mounts. It's a game that is continuously evolving, and as a result, the game is still going after all this time. I remember even back in something like 2008, people said they wouldn't play it because of the subscription-based service, but those that did play it because they would pay it got a game that was never static, that was always changing. There are certain gaps, but for the most part, it's an ever-evolving game. Although it would undoubtedly shrink the player base to add a subscription-based service in, it would give a higher quality experience ideally for those that remain, because the developers would be hugely incentivized to continue to support it. This isn't a method I think they should go down, however. It's just something I'm theorising. I think the backlash would be too immense, and I think that too many players would leave, and considering it's been, well, I shouldn't say free to play, it's been a one purchase pay and then play system so far, it just wouldn't be something people would accept. But it's an interesting idea to consider. I thought it might also be quite interesting to talk about the kinds of DLC we might want to see as a result of this system. And the problem with Star Wars is you know that they will leave at least something essential out. It's such a massive universe that you will not please everyone in this. So really you have to go for what is seemingly most on demand here. And what I'm hearing loads of, and I've been hearing loads about for a while, is a DLC pack that contains General Grievous and Obi-Wan Kenobi as the heroes, and having a Clone Wars map. My personal preference would be Geonosis. I think that even if it's not the first map though, it needs to be in here somewhere. It was the very start of the Clone Wars, truly an iconic moment for Attack of the Clones. It's got some great potential to be a multifaceted map where perhaps you start in the arena in close quarters and then you fight your way outside into the open map, which would be a nice contrast really to what other maps do, where a lot of them start in the open fields and then go into tight quarters. It'd be nice to see that in reverse. For the Starfighter Assault map, it really just has to be that battle above Coruscant at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. There was so much going on there, so much potential for different objectives to be in play. But the more I think about it, the more I realise that of the eras they currently have, it makes sense to just double down on the Clone Wars and only do DLC maps for that. There's so many things you can do. There's Felucia, Coruscant, Naboo again, but maybe in the open fields this time around the forests. Whereas if you look at the other eras like the new trilogy, where I think they've pretty much got all the major stuff now already, and the original trilogy where we already had that done to death in the first Battlefront game, in 2015 I should say, it just doesn't make sense to do anything else for those eras in my opinion. I think you just need to go straight for the Clone Wars. That's where what most people want. Also, that's where most of the heroes people want. You know, you've got Mace Windu, Count Dooku, there's even Kit Fisto, Shakti, Anakin even. We don't even have Anakin yet, and you could choose to take him down the Jedi path if it's early in his career, or if it's right at the end before he gets cut up by Obi-Wan. You could give him Sith powers like Sith Lightning. If anyone ever played the Revenge of the Sith PS2 game, you'll remember he did have Sith Lightning in that, so maybe we could work that in somehow. It would be fantastic. There's so much you can take from that era, and so little that you can really take, I think, from the other eras that would be particularly compelling. I've heard some people talk about adding in stuff from Rebels or stuff from the Old Republic, and, well, you know, don't get me wrong, I would love the Old Republic. I would be so down for that if we had something like Darth Malgus as a hero, but I just don't see them doing it because they'd have to recreate a bunch of assets for the new ships and the new capital ships. I just don't see them doing it as much as I want them to. And Rebels, I don't know if they'll do that. I wouldn't mind it myself, but I think there are other things that need to come first before they do Rebels. Also, a big part of content patches is also rebalancing things in the game that don't quite work too well at the moment. Maybe they break the game, maybe they're too powerful. And after a lot of playing the game, a lot of enjoying it, I do think on the whole it's pretty well balanced. There are some star cards that are pretty potent, but nothing that really breaks the game. Other than one thing, there's one aspect to the game in Galactic Assault that I genuinely feel turns the tide of battle like nothing else. This probably comes as no surprise when I say it, and that's Emperor Palpatine. So it's becoming almost hilarious they didn't patch this in the first 1.1 patch. They patched Wookiees, which were pretty tough, but I have seen Palpatine just absolutely dominating Galactic Assault. He can use his chain lightning to do a bunch of damage around corners and then retreat. It's not necessarily that he does loads of damage, he's just so difficult to kill. Like, I hear some people saying that heroes aren't as powerful as they used to be in the original Battlefront, and whereas Luke in this game probably isn't as powerful as Luke was in the old game, Palpatine is as powerful, if not more powerful, than any hero was in the original Battlefront. He is tough to take down. So, really, I don't have any complaints in terms of balance other than this guy. So, these have been my thoughts on how DICE should continue to support Star Wars Battlefront 2, and also what content we actually want to see. Feel free to share your thoughts, of course, and as always, people, thanks very much for watching, and see you next time.